3 Ukrainian drones were racing through Russian airspace when everything went dark. No GPS, no satellites, nothing but black screens and an invisible enemy. What happened next should have been impossible. 6 drones had entered Russia, hunting the most dangerous target imaginable. A military train 38 cars long. Its cargo enough firepower to level an entire city block. But the drones weren't supposed to survive this long. Russian electronic warfare had already stolen their navigation, hijacked their signals, and blinded their sensors. These weren't Amazon delivery drones that crash when signals cut out. The UJ-26 Beavers had one trick, one the Russians never saw coming. The first step to reach the train was to knock out the eyes of Russia's air defense. A single transformer. Miss it and they become target practice. Hit it and they'd get 20 minutes of blindness. But between them and that transformer stood Russia's most sinister defense. The Repellent 1 system you see here attempted to steal the drones mid-flight. Russian operators watched their screens as the system broadcast fake commands, ordering the Ukrainian drones to land or return to base. They waited for the hijack signals to take effect. They waited in vain. The drones' control signals jumped frequencies 1,000 times per second, like changing radio stations faster than anyone could follow. By the time the Russians locked onto one frequency, the signal had already bounced somewhere else. This wasn't new technology. Frequency hopping was invented by a Hollywood actress in World War II. But implementing it properly meant the difference between drones that obey enemy commands and ones that laugh them off. Meanwhile, half the formation had vanished. The southern group split off to follow the Severky Donets River Valley, adding 40 kilometers to their route, but staying below the radar horizon. Ukrainian intelligence had mapped every radar site along the border, finding invisible corridors where terrain and physics created blind spots just wide enough for a drone to slip through. But flying these corridors was like threading a needle at 180 kilometers per hour. 1 kilometer too far left and the S-300's radar would spot them. 1 kilometer right and they'd enter the detection zone of a mobile to M2 battery. The pilots had to maintain exact altitude, rise above 150 feet, and they'd appear on every screen from here to Moscow. The split formation was already paying off. Russian radar operators watched the northern group's heat signatures near the M4 highway and vectored their Panzer batteries to intercept. They couldn't know that 3 more drones were ghosting through the river valley, exploiting a fundamental law of physics at 25 meters high. Their radar could only see 20 kilometers to the horizon. The Earth itself was hiding the southern group. In the Russian command center, operators faced a nightmare scenario: commit their mobile units north and leave the south exposed, or split their defenses and risk both groups breaking through. They had just seconds to decide. The final approach to Orlovsky required different tactics. The substation sat on high ground with clear sight lines, a death trap where any aircraft would be exposed for over a kilometer. Ukrainian planners had identified what they hoped was a critical weakness: a cellular tower from 800 meters southwest that might create an electromagnetic shadow. If exploited, that blind spot would clear the way to Salsk and with it the ammunition train. But intel was 2 weeks old. If the Russians had moved even one mobile radar unit, the drones would fly straight into a trap. The lead pilot's hands tensed on the controls as they approached the supposed blind spot. No way to know if it still existed until they were already committed. Breaking cover in the final 400 meters meant the Zu-23 crews would have less than 8 seconds to react. But 8 seconds was an eternity when twin 23mm cannons are aimed at you. One drone would have to go first, gambling its survival on outdated intelligence, and they needed at least 3 to survive. 1 for the transformer, and 2 more for what came next at Salsky. The northern group reached the Orlovsky power station at 2:26 a.m. They had navigated 89 kilometers through Russian airspace using a technique called radar gate threading. Radar gate threading exploits gaps in radar coverage created by hills and terrain. Pilots map these blind spots ahead of time and fly through them like threading a needle between detection zones. The drones pop up over ridgelines for exactly 2.898 seconds, which is long enough to navigate but too brief for computers to classify them as valid targets before diving back into cover, essentially playing peekaboo with radar systems all the way to their target. 2 Zu-23 anti-aircraft positions had been hastily deployed to defend this critical infrastructure. Their crews now wide awake and hunting. The Zu-23 is a Soviet-era anti-aircraft gun that refuses to become obsolete. Dual 23mm automatic cannons pump out 2,000 rounds per minute with an effective range of 2,500 meters. Against jets flying at 500 knots, they're nearly useless. But against drones traveling at 180 kilometers per hour, they're devastatingly effective if the gunner can track the target. That's where the system's age showed. Without radar guidance, gunners had to track targets using a simple optical sight. It was literally like trying to shoot skis in a thunderstorm with a sniper rifle. Through the lead Beaver's thermal camera, the pilot could see his objective clearly. A massive 330 kilovolt transformer the size of a small building. This single piece of equipment represented the beating heart of the regional power grid. 6 air defense sites, including a Panzer battery at Salsk, drew their electricity through this transformer. Take it out, and the whole air defense network in this area folds like a house of cards. If they could get it right, here's where things would get interesting. The 3 Beavers split into a classic pincer formation 2 kilometers out. The lead drone climbed to 300 meters, deliberately making itself visible to draw fire. Both Zu-23 positions immediately swiveled toward it, their tracers creating a deadly ceiling. But this was the plan. While the gunners focused upward, the second and third drones hugged the ground, approaching from opposite sides. The second drone popped up just 100 meters from the fence, too close for the Zu-23s to depress their barrels enough to engage. The gunners screamed in frustration as they cranked their weapons down. But the drone had already cleared the fence and dove behind a maintenance building. The lead drone executed a barrel roll through the tracer streams, its pilot using a technique learned from studying Russian gun camera footage. The Zu-23's tracers flew in a predictable pattern. The gunner always led the target by the same amount. By suddenly reversing direction mid-roll, the drone wrong-footed the gunner, causing him to overcorrect. The third drone used the confusion to streak in from the east, flying between 2 rows of high-voltage cables, just 10 meters apart. This forced defenders to hold fire or risk hitting critical infrastructure. One touch of those lines would vaporize the drone in a flash of plasma. As it cleared the towers, all 3 drones converged on the transformer from different angles. The first impact came from the low drone. It struck the transformer's base, rupturing the cooling system. Its 20-kilogram KZ-6-shaped charge detonated on impact, creating a jet of molten copper that punched through the steel like paper. The transformer's cooling oil met superheated metal and flashed into vapor, creating a fuel-air explosion that launched a fireball 60 meters skyward. 2 seconds later, the second drone dove straight down, its warhead punching through the top bushing. The third drone completed the intercept, hitting the control cabinet that might have isolated the damage. 3 strikes, 3 different angles, no escape. But the real destruction came in the next millisecond. With nowhere to go, 330,000 volts of electricity turned the air itself into a conductor. Massive arcs leapt between exposed components, each carrying the power of 1,000 lightning bolts. Circuit breakers tried to interrupt the flow, but the damage was already spreading. Protective relays sensed the fault and disconnected substations in sequence, creating a cascade that plunged half of the region into darkness. At military installations across the region, emergency generators coughed to life. But diesel engines need time to warm up, and electronic systems need stable power. For the next 20 minutes, every radar screen would flicker, every computer would reboot, and every air defense system would be degraded. All while 3 Ukrainian drones were already racing toward this train. At 2:33 a.m., the Panzer S1 crew at the Salsk railway station watched their world collapse. The power surge from Orlovsky had cascaded through the grid like an electric tsunami, knocking out the early warning radars, command centers, and communication links that fed them targeting data. The Panzer itself still had power. Its truck engine hummed steadily, but the system was designed to be one node in a network. Without all the supporting equipment, the crew wouldn't know about threats until they appeared on their own scope, giving them seconds instead of minutes to react. 3 kilometers south, the UJ-26 drones from the other group approached through the storm. The southern group had traveled 155 miles using infrastructure masking, following railway lines where the steel rails and overhead electrical wires created radar interference. Russian air defense doctrine assumed any low-altitude contact following rail lines was a maintenance vehicle or inspection drone. By maintaining exactly 122 meters altitude, just below the primary search beam of the P-18 spoon rest radar at Salsk, they remained invisible until the final approach. The timing was no accident. Ukrainian intelligence knew the Panzer crew conducted a shift change at 2:30, with a 10-minute handover brief where both crews gathered in the command vehicle. The drones arrived precisely during this window, when reaction time would be the slowest and confusion highest. They flew in a loose formation, each pilot watching the others through infrared cameras while monitoring their degraded navigation. Without GPS, they relied on terrain features glimpsed through the rain. A river here, a road there. Each landmark confirming they were still on course for the rail junction. But something was wrong. The lead pilot noticed it first. The railway lights that should have been invisible by now were completely dark. Either the power outage had spread further than planned, or the Russians had set a trap. The Panzer's gunner squinted at his rain-degraded thermal display, trying to separate real targets from phantom returns. The system's manual tracking mode allowed the turret to rotate at 30 degrees per second, barely adequate for crossing targets at 180 kilometers per hour. Without the radar's precise calculations, he had to estimate range and lead angle by eye, like an anti-aircraft gunner from World War II, blessed with modern missiles but cursed with degraded sensors. A flicker of heat caught his attention. Something moving between the trees. Too steady to be a bird, too hot to be ground clutter. He slewed the turret right, fighting the sluggish hydraulics operating on reduced power. The crosshairs danced around the target as he tried to establish a stable track. The fire control computer, designed to process radar data in microseconds, labored for 3 full seconds to generate a firing solution based on the degraded optical units. He squeezed the launch trigger. Nothing. The battery voltage had dropped below the minimum required for the launch sequence. He switched to emergency mode, bypassing safety interlocks designed to prevent misfires. On the second attempt, a 57E6 missile roared from its launch tube. The exhaust flash temporarily blinded the thermal camera, but launching was only half the battle. The Panzer's missiles used command sequence, receiving course corrections throughout their flight via radio data link. Without the radar tracking both missile and target, the crew had to guide it manually using a joystick while watching through rain-obscured optics. It was the same as trying to land a dart on a dartboard while riding a roller coaster in a thunderstorm. The missile's radio command link flickered and went out after just 400 meters, another casualty of the power shortage. Without guidance, the 57E6 continued on its last commanded trajectory, passing harmlessly over the drone. When the Panzer's missile went ballistic, the 3 drones scattered like a school of fish evading a predator. The lead drone snap-rolled left and dove, presenting its smallest profile. The second juked right while climbing, forcing any tracking gunner to choose between targets. The third maintained course, betting the crew would focus on the maneuvering drones. This scattering tactic exploited a fundamental limitation of manual tracking. Humans can only focus on one target at a time. The thermal gunner involuntarily tracked the climbing drone, the most visually distinctive target. By the time he realized his mistake, the lead drone had already ducked behind a warehouse. $15 million of sophisticated air defense technology had been reduced to an expensive fireworks display. The crew commander screamed at his men to prepare another shot, but the battery voltage had dropped below critical levels. The backup power system, designed to maintain the vehicle through brief power interruptions, was never intended for sustained combat operations. The drones regrouped 500 meters from the station, now approaching from 3 different compass points. They synchronized their final run using onboard clocks, no radio emissions to betray their coordination. Each would arrive at the target within 2 seconds of the others, overwhelming any remaining defenses. They could see the drones approaching on the degraded displays, but did nothing to stop them. With defenders firing blind and their most sophisticated weapons reduced to scrap metal by a power outage, nothing stood between the drones and their primary target. At 2:41 a.m., 3 surviving UJ-26 Beavers converged on Salsk railway station from different angles. Their thermal cameras revealed a scene that exceeded Ukrainian planners' wildest hopes. Stretched across multiple tracks sat a 38-car military train, its manifest reading like a shopping list for destruction. Hundreds of artillery and rocket ammunition, plus diesel fuel just waiting for a spark. The 3 drones executed their attack with surgical precision. They approached in an offset echelon, each flying at a different altitude, 50, 100, and 150 meters, forcing any defending gunner to constantly adjust elevation, slowing reaction time. The lead drone's infrared sensor painted the scene in stark contrasts of hot and cold. The locomotive's boiler glowed white hot. Behind it, temperature variations revealed the train's deadly cargo. The fuel cars showed uniform heat signatures from 60,000 liters of diesel fuel each. The ammunition cars appeared cooler. Their reinforced steel walls and careful ventilation designed to prevent exactly what was about to happen. The first drone began its terminal dive, aiming for the locomotive. The engineer had heard the air raid sirens and tried desperately to move his train. However, locomotives could not accelerate as quickly as cars. He could only watch through his cab window as the drones approached at 50 meters per second. The timing was choreographed to maximize destruction. The first UJ-26 struck the locomotive's diesel engine compartment. Its shaped charge, designed to penetrate armor, found easy purchase in civilian steel. The jet of molten copper punched through the engine block, rupturing fuel lines and hydraulic systems. 38 cars of ammunition were now anchored to the tracks. 6 seconds later, the second drone found its mark. Fuel car number 3, chosen specifically because it sat upwind of the ammunition cars. The shaped charge carved through the steel shell as designed, but diesel fuel doesn't explode like Hollywood gasoline. Instead, 60,000 liters of fuel began pouring from the ruptured tank, flowing beneath the train like a burning river. The diesel found hot metal from the destroyed locomotive and ignited, creating a lake of fire that spread with terrifying speed. The third drone targeted an ammunition car near the train center. That position was chosen to spread secondary explosions in both directions. Each pilot watched the other's impacts through their thermal cameras, adjusting aim points in real time. Its pilot knew exactly where to aim. Ukrainian intelligence had identified which cars carried the most sensitive cargo. The KZ-6 warhead penetrated the reinforced walls, detonating among pallets of 130mm artillery shells. The initial blast was relatively small, contained by the car's armored construction. But it started a process that couldn't be stopped. When the third drone made its run, burning fuel had already reached the ammunition cars. Its warhead struck a car already heating up, guaranteeing the sympathetic detonation that would consume the entire train. 3 drones, 3 precise impacts, 1 unstoppable chain reaction. The Russian Ministry of Defense would claim to have shot down 22 Ukrainian drones that night, but livestream videos from dozens of smartphones told the truth. The governor's admission that 2 fuel tanks and a locomotive were damaged seemed almost satirical against footage of the kilometer-wide smoke plume visible from space. Bye for now.